All right, everyone. So I want to talk to you guys about something that's been on my mind for a while now, and that is Catholic fascists. I wasn't really that aware of the reality of Catholic fascists, the existence of Catholic fascists, when I decided to enter the Catholic Church, because I was reading the history of the tensions between fascism and the Catholic Church, between the Third Reich and the Catholic Church, that the very idea of there being Catholic fascists was kind of shocking to me. But then, eventually I did read up on the fact that there were Catholics who were Nazis and who sided with the Third Reich. There were Croatian Catholics who sided with the Third Reich, Italian Catholics. Although they were a minority, there were Flemish Catholics who sided with the Third Reich. The biggest example being Leon de Grelle, who became a major SS officer. He was a Flemish Catholic, and he was a traditionalist Catholic. And when I became Catholic, I wrote a lot about Catholicism. I wrote a lot about Catholic history and theology, because I had this hope of starting a movement. I wanted to get people to become aware of what it means to be Catholic, and how to be Christian really is to partake in a war, a metaphysical and a cosmic struggle against evil. And so I hoped that I could do this, I could spark this awareness, and that I could bring about this consciousness to this reality by educating people on Christian history and the history of fighting against fascism, the history of fighting against Islamic fundamentalism, the history of fighting against paganism. And I thought that I could inspire people, and I did inspire a lot of people. And I don't regret inspiring people to want to fight against evil. But one thing that I noticed over the years, and by the years I mean 2014 up to 2016, one thing that I began to notice a lot of is how a lot of Catholics who are traditionalists become very right-wing, and they become extremely idealistic. So why are so many Catholics vulnerable to falling for fascism? Why would Catholics have the propensity towards fascism and Nazism? It all comes down to idealism. It all comes down to idealism. What happens, and this is one thing that I noticed, and I continue to notice this, a lot of Catholics get into this obsession with order, this fixation on order. If you were to try to find the main difference between leftism and rightism, I would say it's that leftism can have a fixation on breaking the rules, on rebelling against the establishment, rebelling against orthodoxy. Now, rightism can also have this same rebellion, but rightism will always cloak its rebellion with the face of tradition and order. And this, I would say, is one of the main distinctions between the two sides. So Catholics, most Catholics aren't this way, so don't lecture me on this. But what happens to a lot of Catholics who get into traditionalism is that they become fixated on the concept of order. Order, 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 order. Law and order. That's why they always want to go to the Latin Mass, the traditional Latin Mass. Now, I love the traditional Latin Mass. I will always prefer the traditional Latin Mass to the Novus Ordo. I'm not condemning the Latin Mass. But what I am trying to do is point out a certain flaw within a lot of people's perceptions when they are pursuing traditionalism and order and all that stuff. So in their pursuit of order, in their pursuit of traditionalism, they will look for political systems that are perceived as establishing order. So a lot of them will begin to admire monarchs and dictators. And this isn't necessarily bad because they were a lot of righteous monarchs in the past. They were some dictators and monarchs who did good things in the past. You could point to, for example, certain kings, certain governments that had certain governments that were dedicated to one guy. And you could say, well, there were good things that were done. And I'm not saying that this is Hitler or Mussolini. No, to hell with those guys. But nonetheless, they were, for example, dictators who did good things. Like Franco did some good things. Don't get me wrong. But in their pursuit of monarchism and traditionalism, a lot of them will fall prey to Nazi propaganda. Well, the Nazis were all about order. They were Catholics in the ranks of the Nazis. There was Leon Degrelle. He was a great Catholic, and he fought against the communists. And the communists are all about chaos. The communists are all about establishing, left-wing policies and anti-Christian policies. So the Nazis were fighting the communists. Therefore, the Nazis were fighting for Christianity, and they were fighting for order. So they have now this idealism, and they have a hero for the cause of their idealism. Well, then what do you say about the Holocaust? Now they have a conflict because they're Catholic and they have morals and principles against mass murder. Now they have to rationalize the Holocaust. So they'll say, well, the Holocaust didn't happen. Or they'll say, yes, the Nazis killed people, but it wasn't in the millions, and those that they killed were communists or they were leftists, and they needed to be purged out of society. So they will begin to rationalize the Holocaust, or outright deny it, in order to legitimize their idealism. And this is the big problem with idealism. Once reality conflicts with your ideal, once it conflicts with your fantasy, because really that's what it is, it's fantasizing. Once it conflicts with your fantasy, you then have to force reality to conform to your fantasy. How do you do that? You begin to deny reality. You begin to deny history. So for example, let's say you have a Lebanese Maronite, Lebanese Catholic. For those of you who don't know what a Maronite is, it's a Lebanese Catholic. And you have an idealistic Lebanese Catholic, and those do exist. And they'll say, well, we have to fight for our Maronite tradition and our identity, our Lebanese identity. Okay. So then they begin to read all the propaganda, right? Pierre Gemayel was a great guy. Bashir Gemayel was a hero. These were heroes for Lebanon. They were defending the Maronite demographic, the Maronite identity. Those evil Palestinians were trying to destroy us. So then you begin to praise these people as heroes, right? So you have an idealism, and now you have the hero who's fighting to make your idealism a reality. This is what idealism always entails. Idealism always entails a hero. So you have an ideal. The ideal is some kind of pure utopia that you want to establish, but then you always have to have the heroes. You always have to have the heroes, and you also have to have the martyrs, right? You always have to have the martyrs, because you cannot mobilize a mob without the perception of persecution. This is the reality of it all. You have to make a perception of persecution. It's us against them. We're fighting against the elites. We're fighting against some super powerful cabal, some super powerful coalition, and we have to overcome it. So we have a challenge, right? You can't do it without a challenge. It's like mythology. You have to have a hero, and you have to have the bad guys. And so without this, it doesn't work. You have to have martyrs, you have to have persecution, you have to have the perception of a threat and an enemy in order to mobilize your movement, in order to mobilize your mob. So you, the idealist, you begin to revere these people, but then you bring up, well, The fact that your movement has committed some pretty atrocious things. Well, what about Sabra and Shatila? What about the fact that the Maronite fascists went into refugee camps and mass murdered people, raped women, murdered the elderly people? Now you have to rationalize it. Well, Sabra and Shatila, well, that didn't really happen. That was just some PLO propaganda. Or you could say, well, yeah, we did kill people. These, Shamunists and these Haddadists and these Phalangists, yes, they did murder people, but it was for a good cause because the PLO were trying to destroy our identity. So you begin to rationalize it. And once you begin to rationalize mass murder, guess what happens? You are now inclined towards committing murder yourself because we're killing the enemy. And once you can believe that the person that they're telling you to kill is truly the enemy, that is, he's truly seeking for your destruction, it becomes extremely easy to kill people. The Marine Corps does this. The U.S. every military actually does this. The Americans do a very good job on it. They will try to dehumanize the enemy so much so that it becomes extremely easy to kill your enemy. And this can be very effective if you're fighting a war, but it can also be very destructive when you have paramilitaries walking amongst civilians. The Japanese played this game as well. Well, those Chinese people, they're communist. That's why we had to kill all those civilians in Nanking. So why do some Catholics have this propensity towards fascism? It's very simple. It is an obsession with order, and it is also the fixation on communism. Communism is the main enemy. Communism this and communism that. Well, yeah, communism is bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm never going to defend communism. But at the same time, the obsession with communism as an enemy can be used in order to make people vulnerable towards National Socialist ideas. Because if communism is the biggest enemy, well, what was the biggest enemy of communism? It was Nazism. What almost destroyed the Soviet Union? It was the Third Reich. So then Nazism must be good. You see what I mean? So that is what makes a lot of these traditionalist Catholics inclined towards sympathizing with fascism or Nazism. So yeah, that is it. Those are my thoughts on that subject. Hope you guys have learned something. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.